Guidelines exempting Air New Zealand flight crew from a 14-day stand-down following international flights are being reviewed and a further risk assessment carried out to see if more can be done to keep them safe. At the moment, Kiwis or permanent residents returning home from overseas must go into isolation or quarantine at a government-managed facility for 14 days. Currently, more than 2,400 people are in those facilities or hotels, among them 97 people who are quarantined with symptoms. Last night, Checkpoint revealed some Air New Zealand crew are worried the lack of stand-down between flights is putting them, their families and the public at risk, particularly after a flight attendant who later tested positive for the coronavirus attended a wedding in Bluff, and that wedding has now become our biggest COVID cluster. That cluster and about 40% of all COVID cases in New Zealand are linked to overseas travel. In the past half hour, Air New Zealand has confirmed 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19. The Prime Minister was asked if she had concerns about those numbers this afternoon.
When it comes to aircrew, of course, you can imagine how difficult it would be to implement a regime where every time someone went for and fulfilled a shift at work, they then had to stay home for 2 weeks. But what we do need to make sure is that we have protocols in place that protect that workforce and the people around them. What I want to do as we get to a position of continuing to see smaller and smaller numbers coming in, and as we see those flight numbers drop, just reassess again that all of the protocols we've got around alongside health, around our air crew are appropriate, but to date they have had exemptions because of the expectations of protections in place for them while they are working.
So just a quick additional comment. I had a quite detailed memo last night from my border team who are working very closely with Air New Zealand, their Chief Medical Officer, because they are reviewing all those protocols and what has been happening with their crew. In particular, the three international destinations are still flying to, which is the western seaboard of the US, Shanghai and Hong Kong. And there are different arrangements at each, and they're doing a risk assessment to look at what else they can do to help protect their crew and, of course, to make sure that there's no breach in the border when those people come back into New Zealand. So there'll be updated advice and even increased scrutiny of the procedures in place to help make sure we are not importing any cases through that avenue.
Documents obtained by Checkpoint also show there's concern about Ministry of Health guidelines being broken by crew while on international layovers. And this week, Air New Zealand confirmed crew returning from Vancouver were forced to self-isolate after allegedly breaching protocols. Air New Zealand says while 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19, not all of them are cabin crew. Our political reporter Joe Moyer asked Ashley Bloomfield about the situation this afternoon.
Many of those date from pre the lockdown period. But just to reiterate, we are reviewing and looking very closely at the more recent cases and what the current risk is for those staff, particularly when they are sort of on their downtime in one of those three destinations that Air New Zealand is flying to, and what the arrangements are there on the ground, and what else could be done to ensure that they are kept safe there, and also that there is appropriate protection for them and for passengers during the flights, and then what needs to happen when they do come on shore.
I imagine you can think of the difficulty, of course, is that this is these individual stewards' line of work, that if every time they work a shift they're required to then isolate, that becomes very difficult, both for the airline and for them. So made then question, why aren't they then required that whenever they're not working to be only able to be at home? Again, there are issues attached with that as well. That means that for many, many months we could have stewards who wouldn't be able to ever leave their home. So there are issues that we have to work through here, but we're very, very aware of the fact that generally the border is a vulnerability that we have to make sure we have really watertight arrangements around, but that we're also looking after the well-being of those workers.
As mentioned, we did invite Air New Zealand onto the program again this evening, but they once again declined. In a statement, Air New Zealand says international aircrew and airport staff who aren't showing any signs of COVID will be tested for the virus this week. Air New Zealand says the 30 staff who have tested positive are not all crew and not all of them were infected through work. 25 have since recovered and 5 are still recovering at home. Air New Zealand says it hasn't had a positive case in the past 12 days.